Hey everybody, Robert Phoenix here, broadcasting to you live from Flyover, the Sunday night live stream. What's happening? Let me fix my brim here. I'm probably going to see more of a shadowy visage of me tonight because I'm outside. I am outside, and I'll be broadcasting and doing a live stream here tonight in nature. In all of its splendor. You might see some hummingbirds over here. I have a hummingbird feeder here, and then I have a regular bird feeder here. There's Suze Pratt. Hey, what's going on, Suze? It's good to be back in the mix here. I got to fix my brim. I got this Phillies cap back in Philadelphia at the ball game. I was away for 10 days. And the reason why I didn't do a live stream last Sunday night is I was GASSED. I was gassed. I taught last weekend was readings. Did 13 or 14 readings in 3 days in Philadelphia. That was intense. That was quite intense. But good intense. Like, I like doing readings. I like, interacting with people. That's where the magic is. That's where the magic takes place. Well, there's magic all around us all the time. We just don't always see it. But when I connect in with somebody at a personal level, and it's alchemical, it's really great. And then the weekend prior to that, I did do a class, and I have 12 hours. I have 12 hours of navigating the chart, which I'm going to make available. I have an audio recording. Hey, what's going on? Trog, Autocrat, 666. What's happening? Can you see the hummingbird above my head? Hummingbirds are interesting. I'm learning a lot about hummingbirds. And they're not, every hummingbird is not the same. They're not the same. What's going on, Amanda? Hummingbirds are very territorial. They're extremely territorial. So the hummingbirds might actually steal the show tonight. To my right shoulder is a regular bird feeder. And the barn swallows come over there and they eat the shit out of that bird feeder. Man, those barn swallows get really hungry. Like I filled that bird feeder today, and the barn swallows just went at it. And the hummingbirds are great. First time I've ever seen a baby hummingbird before. They look like bugs. They're that small. But I've seen some turf wars going on in the feeder. And this is like a big deal for them, this feeder. Now these two are getting along pretty well. But I've seen it, like, I saw one hummingbird this morning come in. I hit another bird with its little proboscis. Hit it right in the back. Like, get out. And they're starting to get used to me now. So they kind of hover above me. They're like checking me out. And I said to them, I am your God because I provide this for you. And they're into it. They're fine. What's going on with everybody? What's happening out there? I missed doing the live streams because I've just been incredibly busy. Really, really busy over the course of the last couple of weeks. We're going to get into the eclipse tonight. We're going to get into some other stuff tonight as well. If you go to my website, robertphoenix.com, you'll see the chart that is indicative of the eclipse, and I'll put that up as we go through the charts tonight. And we'll get into what this eclipse looks like. And I think it's a pretty intense eclipse. We're dealing with two aspects. We're dealing with the moon in Leo, right? And we're dealing with the true node also in Leo. This is where the eclipse takes place. It's because of the true node in Leo and the new moon in Leo. The eclipse will happen. And we've been dealing with the crisis of children over the course of the last, couple of weeks, really. But, once the true node went into Leo, and I've written about this and I've spoken about this pretty consistently. Are you going to get my other wildcat tonight, Rosie? She likes it outside. She'll come out here. Here she comes. Want to say hi to everybody? Want to say hi? The hummingbirds are way too fast for her. Here she is. That's Rosie. Say hi, Rosie. Yeah, I know her. Rosie's very territorial. Let's put it that way. Although her and Jasper have really, I sound weird, I know. Like, I really like animals. I like dogs. I used to live with wolves. I'm into, I've got to, display my man cred here. But her and Jasper actually have kind of an epic romance and relationship. They totally love each other. Anyway, I want to talk about a few things. And clearly what we saw with the true node in Leo was this externalization of children. Now, just because the true node is in Leo doesn't necessarily mean, no, you don't. I talk to the animals. Just because the true node in Leo doesn't necessarily mean that it's always like good or positive. I mean, it's going to get our attention. Wherever the true node is, wherever it's transiting, it's always going to get our attention. So with the true node in Leo, of course, we're dealing with children, we're dealing with the border crisis, and I wrote about this on my website to a large extent. But then what was really fascinating was what was taking place at the same time this whole kind of drama was unfolding at the border was there were people, like supposedly men, being brought into Italy and Spain. And there's a boat called the Aquarius, which is known for bringing migrants or refugees. And they're supposedly young men. But if you look at them, they're not really young men. And there are very few women that are part of this experience. And so what happened was that boat was actually turned back. It came back again. So we had the nodes taking place, really the South Node in Aquarius, and it was vis-a-vis the ship known as the Aquarius coming into, at that time, I believe it was Spain, and then turned away. And then, of course, we had the border crisis with the true node in Leo, the children. Really fascinating times. But unfortunately, and I've said this before, I believe the children are emotional currency. And the emotional currency is what gets people, hey, what's going on, Kelly? Is what gets people who are in positions of power to sign off on fill in the blank. And I've covered this before, and it's a form of exploitation as far as I'm concerned. It's not exploiting children to the extent that, like it was, I don't know, what 1900s exploitation in London where children were slaves. I mean, that was clearly a form of exploitation. And there is exploitation with children that does go around the planet. I mean, it's happening. You get kids who are working, 12 to 13, 14 hours in slave factories. Hey, what's going on, Indigo? In all parts of the Far East and Asia. That doesn't get really talked about, though, does it? Nope. Doesn't get talked about at all. What gets talked about is what's being politicized and where that light is being shown on children, which is the true node in Leo. So it gets our attention and it plays our heartstrings. And I'm not saying that these kids don't have a difficult journey or lot in life, but at the same time, I think it's really important for us to be able to step back at certain times so that we understand that, we're not being played on an emotional level. This is, I think, vitally important because a lot of manipulation takes place, as we all know, and gets us to move our emotional signal. And when it's with children, that emotional signal gets moved very rapidly. And it ties into the traumatized and triggered parts of the child within all of us. And so when we stand up for children, yes, it's humanitarian. It comes from the heart, which is Leo, but it's also coming from a place inside of ourselves where we have been damaged, traumatized, and triggered. And so we want to step in and make a difference and make sure that the quote unquote children get a fair shake. Because what happened? What's going on, Shari? Happy Sunday to you as well. So what happened when you were a kid? All of us went through some form of trauma. And who was there? Who was there to broker that deal? Or who was there to stand in the way or stand in the line of the trauma? Generally speaking, nobody. So when we see these children, for whatever reason, or however they got there, under whatever circumstance, it's the part of ourselves in many cases. Jill, what's going on, Jill? I haven't seen Jill in a long time. Can you see the hummingbird behind up on top of my head? I thought we'd bring the hummingbird energy in tonight. They're hungry little critters, right? So when we see that, we want somebody to stand in. It's bringing me peace. I love these birds. They're awesome. I'm learning a lot from these birds. We want somebody to come in and stand in the way of what the injustice is. And that injustice is inside of us. Everything is an externalization of what's taking place within us. So that true node in Leo is getting attention. It's getting attention in the mainstream theater, but it's also getting attention inside of us. In the inner stream. There's the mainstream, then there's the inner stream. And the inner stream is your experience. So what we do now through this process, we have the South Node in Aquarius. In some ways, this is where the outrage comes from, right? It's like these children need a place to live. They shouldn't be separated from their parents. It's very Aquarian. Let's have a cause. And while I believe that every child needs to have a chance and an opportunity to survive, in many cases we act reflexively because of what's going on inside of us and what this dynamic represents. So I wrote about that extensively on my website. If you haven't seen my latest post, you can go there and check that out as well and kind of understand where I'm coming from with this. It's another form of politicization and kind of moving a program of divide and conquer using the emotional currency of children. Okay, that's my 2 cents around what's taking place. And I also believe that, if people have such a hard time with what's happening with the children on the border, it's like, well, why don't you open your home and bring some of them in? And maybe some people have. And I've actually had conversations with people like that. And the conversation stops because it's usually the government's responsibility. Well, we are the government. So it becomes our responsibility, theoretically, right? Yeah. I wanted to talk a little bit about Anthony Bourdain before we get into the eclipse energy tonight. And I wrote pretty big post on Bourdain, and I did a live stream on Bourdain. Got some pretty good numbers. I think I'm up around 1,800 views on the Bourdain piece. And I covered it in great detail. What was that, about 3 weeks ago now on the Sunday night live stream? But there is a part of the Bourdain experience that I haven't really talked about, and I do want to mention here on tonight's show. And one of the pieces that came out around the Bourdain death was his life with Asia Argento in roughly the last 3 months that he was alive and was involved with her. And it's a really interesting, depressing, and tragic tale in many ways. I posted an entry. It was a blog post on toxic feminism, over on Facebook. And one of the things that came out in this piece was how much power Asia Argento had over Anthony Bourdain, which of course I detailed when I did my post on Bourdain. And the power of Argento in her chart superimposed on his, he gave away his will to her. And in that instance, or that dynamic, she became a succubus and began to literally siphon off his spiritual energy, much in the same way that these hummingbirds will come to this feeder and take part in the sugar water. You know, they're feeding off of this. And this is what was happening was with Asia Argento. She was feeding off of him. And you can see some of the comments or some of the inside pieces now that are being revealed over the last months of his relationship with her. There were people who were very close to Tony who were trying to get him to move away from her. And when they became personally engaged and involved to that extent, he cut them out. That's how invested he was in Asia Argento. He lost friends over her. And not only that, he actually lost a longtime person. Asia tweeted, "Thank God for Lucifer." Yeah, there you go. There's Tanya. What's going on, Tanya? Yeah, so I believe that Anthony Bourdain was a sacrifice for Asia Argento. That's my 2 cents. But I want to get even deeper with that. How much deeper can you go for sacrifice? I don't know. But I want to try to get deeper with that. Because not only did he leave his friends or keep his friends in some form of cryogenic suspension, he actually, I think I lost the chat here for a little bit. Hope the stream is okay. Here we go, we're back. We're just watching African Animal Show with people around the world. I'm going to do Hummingbird Cam, by the way. I'm going to buy one of those kind of GoPro knockoffs, and I'm doing Hummingbird Cam. I'm going to be live streaming hummingbirds on YouTube. It's going to be a freaking internet sensation. You wait and see. These hummingbirds, man, they get into some real intense aerial fights. They're very territorial over that sugar water. Anyway, there's somebody at my door. Who's at my door? Hold on a second. I got to see this. Hold on. I'll be right back. Who is it? I got the wrong apartment. Yeah, it was. It's all right. It was Domino's Pizza. Wrong door. Absolutely. Okay. So Anthony Bourdain was losing not just his friends, but he actually canned somebody who was on the crew. Somebody who was a longtime member of his crew. Why? Because Asia Argento wanted him gone. It's not a good thing. Not a good thing at all. He had totally given all of his power over Asia Argento to her. She is a witch. Absolutely, she's a witch. Okay, so we know that she's a succubus. And she is. And he was possessed. Absolutely. He was possessed by her and whatever other demon he let into his life. Siren. Absolutely. Okay. Now I want to come at this from the male perspective. Clearly, it's a human perspective where a human literally gives up his power to some supernatural force, which is what took place with him and Asia Argento. But the male perspective is interesting because it took place with Chiron and Aries, and it's still very early in Chiron and Aries. And so what Anthony Bourdain became was a symbol of the wounded male. It's exactly what he became a symbol of, the wounded male, Chiron and Aries. And this, he became, in my estimation, emblematic of what happens with men in relationships where they give their power away. There's a feminine version of this, okay? Clearly there's a feminine version where women give their power away. By the way, that's the Persephone. That is the Persephone model and archetype, where the woman gives her power away and then she descends into Hades and has to deal with possession, sexual possession, personal possession, and women who have either Moon Pluto squares or Venus Pluto squares generally have to go. Men will go through it as well, but it's a bit different for men. They get into issues with their mother with a Pluto Moon square. Just like an Easy neighborhood sniper video. All right, man. Easy was a badass. I liked Easy, the NWA world. You have Moon square Plutos. Okay, so Tanya, let's play this out. Tanya's in the chat room. She has Moon square Pluto. Tanya, ask you a question. How many times have you had to be engaged with another person, a man who has an almost supernatural kind of control or power over you that you have to steal back and emerge out of the underworld with your emotional body intact and your psyche kind of reformatted? How many times does that happen? Usually it's at least one if it's really powerful and good, right? If you can go through one time and reclaim it's a very powerful, like people, especially women who have a Moon Pluto square in their chart, they have to go through a deep and profound journey into the dark night of not just their soul, but another soul as well. And it can be very powerful and also at times deadly. And Pluto conjuncts Tanya, you living on the edge. Tanya's living, she's intense, man. I tell you the one thing about Pluto, if you've got hard Pluto aspects in your chart and you get through them, you know who they are. You know who you are. There's no, pussyfooting with any hard Pluto aspects. You just know who you are. You get through. If you don't get through, sometimes, to be honest with you, you may not make it. It's natural selection, right? There are people who have hard Pluto aspects and they may not make it. They'll succumb. They'll go into the undertow and never be resurrected or reborn through some kind of alchemical force in their life, which is based on moving towards higher levels of ascent and ultimately oxygen, right? Pluto, Venus, Mercury conjunct in the 12th house. Holy smokes. Black market medicine is on a master path. Right there, the Pluto, Venus, Mercury conjunction in the 12th house. That's mediumistic energy, by the way. That's a trans mediumistic energy in trance channeling, communing with the dead in the 12th house. Absolutely. I know people at Pluto in the 12th house, and a lot of them have actual jobs where they're working with the dead. Like, I have a really, really dear friend, and she does Reiki massage for people who are, going out. Pluto in the 12th house. Saturn conjunct Pluto in the 12th house. It's her karma. I have another friend who had Pluto in the 12th house, and she was a mortician. Pluto in the 12th house. So let's bring it back to Bourdain. Women have their own version of this with the Pluto Moon square, which is why we brought this up. With Bourdain, it was Chiron and Aries. And right at the jump, right out of that shot out of the cannon, as a man, right? As a man, I saw this. I saw what was going on with Anthony Bourdain. He said, yeah, did you hear that? That was kind of cool, right? A little applause in the background. Hi, Shauna Lee. Yeah, it's good to be back. I had to like take a time out for a while. I had to get away when I was in Pennsylvania. Oh, aloha from Maui. How you doing out there, Teresa? Are you safe out there in Maui? I hope so. If you're a man and you're watching Born Safe, what a great comeback. I asked her if she was safe, and she was born safe. That's like a high five right there. If you're a man and you're watching what's going on with Bourdain, you got to take notice with that. If you're a young man and you're watching what happened with Anthony Bourdain, take double notice with that, because he gave his power over to an enchantress. And this is what happened with men, I would say, back in the 1960s. Now, if you go back prior to 1960, was it 69, when Chiron went into Aries? Chiron was in Pisces, and it was in Pisces for about 7 years, right? So when that happened, so we're going 69 to about 62. This is the rise of Playboy, and this is the rise in the 70s of the magazines that are spun out of Playboy, like We, which was the European version of Playboy. Penthouse came to sort of prominence in the 1970s, and that's the time when porn really takes kind of hold of the male consciousness and the male psyche, is during the 1970s. And this is when Chiron was in Aries. So there was a lot of projection from men going into movies like The Devil and Miss Jones, Behind the Green Door, Deep Throat. These are all 1970s movies when Chiron is in Aries. And it's when there is the soft porn industry. And it was an industry taking place at that time. And that's when I grew up. Right? That's when my hormones were kicking in during the 1970s. And so what happened with men during that time is our attention was kind of rerouted. And it was easy to do because, 14, 15 years old. And, these tools, it's about as close as being online then as it is now. When I was a kid, we used to sneak into an X-rated drive-in in San Jose, California. Right? I mean, that's what happened when I was a kid. But in so doing that, we gave our power away. We gave our power away to these images and to this kind of ideal of, what sex should look like, or what intimacy should look like, or what romanticism should look like. And in most cases, this was kind of an interesting fulcrum and dynamic, because at the same time, women's liberation was going through second wave women's liberation, kind of the crest of first/second wave women's liberation. So you have two dynamics going on during the 1970s when Chiron is in Aries. It's the rise of women's liberation. You have, of course, Stonewall, which takes place right at the beginning of Chiron in Aries. And then there's the sexual, I don't want to call it exploitation, but there's certainly the sexual cultivation and mining of men's attention during that time. And I think that we got really thrown off track. And I've talked about this before, and even prior to that, like if you go back into the early 1900s, when at one point in time, men were supposed to be the protectors of the family. They would, if you had a farm or a piece of land, it was the man who would kind of stay up and make sure that people would not come in and steal the cattle or rape, pillage, and plunder. That was a man's job. I mean, that's what we did, and that gets us as close as the version of the male lion. That's who we were. And then when the armed sort of municipal armed services, aka police, came in, they usurped the male's role in doing that. And so when that happened, in a very powerful way, men were left without a primary role to play. And I don't want to go back too far, but we've been trying to find our way moving forward ever since then. And when Chiron was in Aries, again, during the 1970s, this is when the soft porn explosion took place. And I'm not anti-soft porn or whatever. If you want to pick up a magazine and get titillated, it's up to you. or online. It's your choice. But in doing that, it took men out of the realm of the real and put us into the realm of the unreal. And it put us into the realm of objectification. And what happened with Anthony Bourdain, with Asia Argento, in as much as he had the astrological components that were pinging his chart, he became immersed and hypnotized by objectification. I thought that was due to Neptune and Scorpio. Yeah, I mean, Neptune and Scorpio was around in the 60s. And obviously that's when Playboy took off, was when Neptune was in Scorpio. But the commodification and the industrialization of pornography takes place in the 70s. And that's when there are movie houses. Like if you go back to the 60s, if you wanted to see a pornographic movie or an erotic movie, there may have been maybe 2 or 3 areas in the entire country where you might have been able to go into a public space and do that: New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. If not, you had a private movie, right? Private movie. But in the 1970s, there was the industrialization of softcore pornography. And then you had movie theaters all over the place in the 1970s. So during that time, the process of objectification really, I think, took hold and created a whole series of very difficult kinds of standards for both men and women to live up to during that time and beyond it. And Anthony Bourdain was part of that process because he was born in 1956, right? So in 1976, Anthony Bourdain was 20 years old, right? He was 20 years old in 1976, living in New York City, which at that time, if you went, to 42nd Street in New York City, it was completely debauched, and he would have full access. And I'm not saying that that's what he did and that corrupted him, but it was a part of the time. It was a part of that period with Chiron and Aries. And what happened was that, as men, and we didn't know any better, we gave away our power. We gave away our power to these soft porn sirens, and we gave away our power in some ways to the men that were actually having sex with these soft porn sirens. And there is this displacement of our spirits that happened during that time. So let's fast forward and let's get into where we are now with Chiron and Aries. And Anthony Bourdain becomes a victim. He becomes a sacrifice, not only to Asia Argento, who is a full-on red witch, but he becomes a sacrifice for, in some ways, men in general. And I don't know what the future holds for men, to be honest with you. I'm going to have Regina Meredith's boyfriend. I guess they're married now. I take that back. I'm going to have her husband on my show, hopefully in the next week or two, because he's written a book. He was from another world. Then we men could watch. That's right. Regina's husband has written a book, and I'm going to have him on my show. He's an Aries, and she's raving about his book, and I'm going to have him on, and it's about I think it's the spiritually confident male. So we as men, and I don't care where you are in the male spectrum, whether you're 57 or 17, right? I think we have an obligation to live out this role and this identity as being a male. And we have Chiron and Aries. And so it's a time where we need to be able to explore it. And Anthony Bourdain, I believe, gave us a lesson of men who divest themselves of their will and their power to another person. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be a woman, although in this case, certainly it was. But it's a very interesting cipher that we need to be able to really think about and understand and bring home. And I know that's a kind of a big issue for me in my life. And I've had to have some time to think about it. I've had time to think about, what my role was growing up and how, I was deeply invested in this idea that the only thing that really mattered was my sexual gratification. above all else. Now, of course, I, was in a relationship and stuff like that, but that was the programming that we got. It was like, you got to get this. If you don't get this, number one, you're a failure, or number two, you're not doing it right, right? You're not doing it right. You're not running the program right. And then when that happens, you see yourself up against these other images, whether they're in culture or whether they're in media, and then there's a real displacement. So we have an opportunity now, and I'm just speaking here as a man. We have an opportunity now where we can revisit these things and realign ourselves with this whole idea around sexual energy, which is really powerful. I mean, sexual energy is the most powerful juice on the planet, bar none. I mean, it is that thing that connects us up to this ecstatic, transcendent source of creation and life. It's a big deal. It's a really big deal. And I've got a wide kind of vector for that. I'm not moralistic per se, but I do know for me personally, and I think it might be really reasonable for men to understand what this dynamic and this power is, right? And so that we can actually, hold it inside of ourselves in a way that is accountable. Because then there's the emotional piece. It's not just sex, right? Then there's the emotional piece, which gets into romantic love and the court of romance, and that goes all the way back to the 1500s and the courts of Europe and all the romance poems, epics, and novels that became really influential in how we in the West interpret romantic love. That's a whole other story. Anyway, I just wanted to get into this about Bourdain because I think it's really emblematic of a male who gave his power away, and probably not just in that moment or that instance with her. I think she became this kind of theater for him to participate in with that and what it means. And I think men in general should look at that and realize that it's not worth it when you give yourself away. And I think people in general should have that basic understanding. Women too, when you give yourself away in a way that is not going to be fundamentally profound or trusted or respectful, you're doing yourself a disservice. But when it does happen, when you can give yourself away, when you can surrender, it is a beautiful thing. I think it's a beautiful thing. When you have two people that can trust one another and let go, and the woman can be in a very receptive and profound, deep place where they're connected to the spirit of creation, and the man can be a part of that and co-create with that. It's so powerful, so profound, and hopefully we can realign some of this, with Chiron and Aries. Anyway, enough sermonizing about that. You want to get into the eclipse? You guys want to get into this eclipse? All right. So if you go to my website, robertphoenix.com, I put the eclipse chart up, so we can look at that. Now I'm going to, on the 11th, speaking of the male-female dynamic, Heather Eland, who has done some interviews with me. She's terrific. Heather was one of my students here in Austin. So we're going to do a kind of a male-female dynamic breakdown of this eclipse and then the one following. I'm not going to do the following eclipse. I'm going to hold off on that because Heather and I are going to break that down. But I will get into this one, and we'll also get into it, but we'll get into it from a bit of perhaps a different dynamic. So I'm just going to speak to the elements of the eclipse. So if you go to my website, I've got that eclipse chart up, robertphoenix.com. And the universal time on that is 9:28 p.m. And I basically picked New York City because, of course, that's kind of the first part of the United States if you're coming across from Western Europe. It's a very interesting eclipse. It has kind of a Star of David effect. Can you see that? We have two interpenetrating grand trines. So this is a pretty powerful eclipse. Okay. This eclipse has some juice. Even though it's not going to be floating over the United States, even though it's not a full eclipse. If you look at the angular relationships, there's a lot going on here. So the two grand trines are taking place on Earth and water, right? So we have a Jupiter at 13 Scorpio, which is the highest planet in this eclipse. It's at apex. It's in the 9th house. And it has some very powerful and positive angles, and it has some challenging ones as well. Let's look at the powerful and positive ones. Jupiter is in trine with Neptune, which is retrograde amongst a bunch of other planets. So Neptune is retrograde, but it's in the 1st house, and Jupiter is in trine with it. And there, by the way, it's a wide trine, but nonetheless, at 8 degrees, there is the sun in Cancer. So there is a great deal of emotional content that's available during this eclipse. In Jupiter at the top of the chart, theoretically, is bringing our attention to higher aspects of consciousness. And in Scorpio, we have the potential of regeneration, right? The regeneration or the resurrection of our consciousness, of our relationship with the divine at a very high level. But it's not divine that's devoid of feeling or depth or intensity. Scorpio is an intense sign, right? And you get into Scorpio, you get into things like inheritance, the 8th house, what you inherit. Sometimes the inheritance is that. It's a physical inheritance that takes place when planets transit the 8th house. There's another inheritance that takes place in the 8th house, and that's your genetic inheritance. It's like what you took from your ancestors. Now, the 4th house has a connection to your home and the emotional values that you were raised with. But the 8th house transcends the home. It gets into your bloodline. It gets into your grandfathers and grandmothers and great-grandfathers and great-grandmothers. You want to take it one step further, we go to the 12th house, and that's your spiritual bloodline. I mean, it's all spiritual, right? But the 12th house is going to be 12th house material. It's your spiritual guides, your spiritual teachers, your angels, your spiritual elders to some extent. They don't always have to be your bloodline elders. Like I really relate to William Blake, right? I'm not related to William Blake, but he'd be my spiritual bloodline. He'd be one of my spiritual teachers. So we see the emotional influence in every one of those houses. The 4th house, it's your immediate family, it's your hearth, your home. The 8th house, it goes back into your bloodline and your DNA. And the 12th house takes you out into the transcendental relationship with your spiritual ancestors, which may or may not be your own bloodline. Okay. So when we get into that, that's what Scorpio is because of the 8th house. You're here with Jupiter and Scorpio at apex. And that gets us to think about, guess what? 9th house here, it gets us to think about higher consciousness and expanding our totality out to a place where we're connecting with our genetic inheritance because it's in Scorpio, our genetic inheritance. And I think it's finding because we're dealing with, the sun in Cancer and that moon, that new moon in Leo, a true node in Leo. It's not just our genetic inheritance, but it's pieces inside of ourselves that we can grab from that are actually kind of profound markers for how we can move through this lifetime and get closer on a moment-to-moment basis. And I use the word God, and it's very loaded. It's a very loaded term. It means a lot of different things, right? Game overseer, director, and there's a bunch of meanings up for it. But to me, it's a pretty profound and powerful and personal emanation that is involved in everything. It's involved in the hummingbirds and my cat and a little garden over there, and manages the whole freaking universe, right? And even if this is a matrix, it's probably managing over that as well. and saying, hey, get in touch with me so you can get the hell out of here. Transcend this place. If it's a game and God is a game overseer director, why not? But with Jupiter up there, we're opening up, right, to this idea of expansion. And it's expansion through our lineage. It's our inheritance. And I would say in the ninth house, it is our spiritual inheritance, because that's what the ninth house is about. And in trine with the sun and in trine with Neptune, I think, don't be afraid of this lunar eclipse. Do not be afraid of this lunar eclipse. If you really open yourself to the energy of this lunar eclipse, I believe you could have a profound experience. And the reason why is because, the veils are getting very thin in our world. We're separating out. We're involved in this dualistic opera. And when that happens, some very interesting things can take place for people, because the scales begin to fall away. Now, if you're rerouted into a different kind of reality or a different kind of truth, well, that's part of it, right? And that's taking place. But the scales are falling away. And so when it does and the veils become thin, there is the potential for profound, communion. Don't be afraid of it. We're living in a time where that profound communion is starting to evaporate to some degree as well, because of the influence of electronics and 5G and all the stuff that is part of that program. So in some ways, it can be a bit harder to stay in touch with this spirit that runs through all of our lives. And I talk to people sometimes, and they'll say, I used to be able to see the future or know what was coming. I could feel that there was something, I was moving towards something, or I always felt like there was this, energy or this force inside of me that was kind of guiding me and leading me. And don't get me wrong, some people still have that. But there are some people who've lost that, and they're kind of, swimming without a rudder, or, they're swimming without a tail fin. It's very difficult. But here's a time where you could get back on track if you open yourself up to it. And remember, this is Friday the 13th. Very powerful day. Friday the 13th, it's a new moon lunar eclipse. And it's going to be in the sign, of course, of Leo. We're going to get more child stuff. It's going to happen. It is going to happen. One of the things that I think you're going to see, I'm going to go on record with this. We haven't seen this in a while. There's going to be an event at an abortion clinic on or around this lunar eclipse. And a lot of these events are completely staged. Most of you know that. There's a very strong chance this will not be a staged event. And the reason I'm seeing this is because we have Mars on the ascendant, which is aggression and energy, could be construed as violence. We have Aquarius on the midheaven, in the ascendant with Mars right there. And what is it doing? It's opposing the moon. So we have the nodal opposition. We have Mars on the south node, which is violence and not a particularly enlightened form of violence. Okay, this is violence that drives a program. And it's opposite the new moon in Leo, conjunct the true node, which is children. And then there's that square with Uranus. This T-square is potentially very, very destabilizing. Okay, we know that shit happens on Fridays. People get laid off on Fridays, and it's a big news day on Fridays. That's what happens. So what are we dealing with? We're dealing with a new moon, lunar eclipse on a Friday the 13th, with a Mars-Uranus square, a Mars-Moon opposition. And I feel like we're going to be looking at something to do with mothers and with birth and with violence. And there's one place that more than likely takes place, and that's a Planned Parenthood facility. So just file that away. Hope it doesn't happen. Love to be wrong. I don't want to see anybody get hurt or wounded or killed. If you have to stand up for yourself, you have to defend yourself, or you defend your family, that's a whole other thing. And I co-sign on that. And you do whatever it takes to defend the people that you love. But arbitrary violence, I am not an advocate of by any stretch. The other thing that's taking place is a grand trine in Earth. So we have Venus and Virgo in conjunct the vertex. And we get into Venus. Venus and Virgo is really interesting. This is really complex because there's a yod going on with Uranus and Pluto, right? So what are we talking about? We're talking about purity. We're talking about purity. We're talking about virginity. And that's why this language of the abortion or Planned Parenthood comes into play because of this strong Virgoan virgin energy that's also in the mix. And we have a Venus trine to Saturn and a Venus trine to Uranus. And that makes, for all intents and purposes, this kind of squirrely sort of Star of David. It's really fascinating. So we're dealing with these feminine energies with water and earth. And it is a powerful, powerful time. Conversely, we're dealing with the T-square, which are masculine energies to some degree. Air with Mars, fire with the moon and Leo, and then coming in and squaring it off is that Uranus and Taurus. So this eclipse is going to, I could spend probably the next 2 or 3 hours just breaking down this upcoming eclipse. And there's a call to action during this eclipse, or, either before or after. There's a call to action. And that call to action is some form of retribution. Because that's the nature of Mars retrograde, right? Like something happened. Well, let's get into that retrograde language, which is retribution, revenge, what else? Revisiting, but retribution and revenge probably are the two words that I think describe this material in a lot of ways. And there's it's kind of like this we've gotten into this kind of Hammurabi, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. There's no forgiveness anymore. There's no compassion. There's no surrendering and seeing something, and it's gotten very, very explosive and divided. So we're in this kind of Old Testament cosmology in a lot of ways. People want blood. They want blood. And it's unfortunate because it's dividing and conquering us, and a house divided shall fall. But this eclipse has profound, and I mean profound, energy that's connected to it. Chiron is in Aries. It's retrograde, but it's trining the moon. It's trining the true node, right? Watch out for fabrication during this full moon. Fabrication and lies. Full-on fabrication and outright lies, because we have a Mercury square to Jupiter in the chart. What does Jupiter do? Blows everything up, makes it bigger. Right? Watch out. If you're going to get into like anything around Jupiter and Mercury and square, especially in Leo, and you're going to blow it up, maybe you can like overemphasize how you love somebody. That may not be a bad thing. They may get sick of you, but make up for lost time. We've got Pluto also going through an opposition with the sun. It's very intense. Really, really intense, the Pluto-Sun opposition. And all these planets are hidden in the 12th house, right? Black Moon Lilith, Capricorn. Part of fortune, Capricorn. Pluto, Capricorn. That's behind the scenes. There's something going on behind the scenes as well with this eclipse. There's orchestration. There's something Machiavellian about this. The Machiavellian energy is there. And it almost comes down to this Pluto-Sun opposition. Like, what side are you on? Whose side are you taking? Again, it's part of the divide and conquer kind of abyss that's opened up here. But the vertex conjunct Venus is to seek Venus and Virgo, and it's part of that grand trine. It actually opens up, because Venus and Virgo can be real picky. But it opens up that Venus and trines it in with Uranus. And it's like, well, there's more kind of latitude. There's more novelty. It's not so locked up in I can only be this way with this person. It actually, there's kind of a safety net here where you can have a relationship or connection with another person and have it be grounded with the Venus trine, but also being kind of exciting and different. And if you're in a relationship, this could be a really fantastic time for somebody in a relationship, to be honest with you. Like if you want to recalibrate with this grand trine and water and earth, all this feminine energy, to hell with the world, make new vows, get into the profound nature of being and bonding and blending. Could be really cool. But I also think we're going to deal with some worldly stuff here. And I don't think it's going to be pretty. And this whole story and drama with children has been with us since Pizzagate. We've seen how it's been used and exploited to move agendas and programs along. Hear the kids in the background. Pretty cool, huh? All right, let me check in with you in the old chat room there. Let's see what you got going on. See what's happening. Let's see. Oh, there's more light behind me now. Let's take my glasses off. See, I don't have to do the chart now because I've read it, but I do have to read your comments. Let me check that out. Let's see what we have. Let's see. Normal person walks through a cloud of something bad and turns evil. Maybe collectively, but I've had this beautiful experience with new people just in the past few days. How about that? Good for you. Tons of lies. Feel the Q stuff is heating up. Oh, I know. The Q thing, man. Get off the Q program. Yes, authentic heart-to-heart connections with spirit wings. A dark tide. Which element is grand trine in? 2 elements, earth and water. The chart on his website. Oh, I just heard him say, yes, got to pull it up. Sloppy layout. All good. What else do we have here in the chat room? Just started talking about Friday 3. How much? Oh, it's Joe. Joe, man, you got to show up. Come on, Joe. 8 o'clock. 9 o'clock your time. I'm just kidding. Joe's a good lady. She's fantastic. Reading. Let's see. Can you do a chart reading for LeBron going to the Lakers? Wow. Okay. I don't think he's going to the Lakers. And I'll tell you why. It has nothing to do with this chart. First of all, Paul George was supposed to be part of that posse. He just re-signed with Oklahoma. Okay. The third person who would be a part of that deal down in LA is Kawhi Leonard, and no way is Craig Popovich and R.C. Buford sending Kawhi Leonard to the Lakers. I believe Kawhi Leonard will be a Philadelphia 76er. So where does that leave LeBron? I think probably Houston. I think LeBron's landing might be Houston if they can manage some of those contracts. If Chris Paul, the Taurus, isn't so greedy. These guys have so much money. It's incredible. But Chris Paul wants to sign for the max contract. I think LeBron should go to Houston, although he doesn't like Houston. I'm going to go on the record. I'm going to say, and I could be wrong, LeBron stays in Cleveland. I'll give you one dark horse. You ready for the dark horse for LeBron? The LA Clippers. That's the dark horse. What else? Am I a pedophile? LeBron signed. He signed to LA? Oh, wow. When did that happen? Did that just happen? Did LeBron just sign? Let me check. I'm kidding. Chill. I'm my pedophile. Why would you ask that question? Why would you ask that question, though? That's an interesting question if I was a pedophile. Oh, so LeBron's in LA. Wow. I'm really surprised. Well, there was a rumor that he was headed to LA in a plane, right? Interesting. Very interesting. All right, I'll do that. I'll do a sports thing. Yeah, I'll look at that. That's so fascinating. Wow, I really thought that. Who's going to be his third amigo? That must mean Chris Paul or Kawhi is coming to LA. It's got to be. Interesting stuff. Fascinating. Let's check out LeBron's chart really quickly, since we're in it. Let's see who we got. Oh, that's news. I did not know. I thought, man, when Paul George did not sign with the Lakers, I thought that would be a missing piece there, a big one. Okay, so LeBron James has, it's like he's a Gemini rising. And I think the most important aspect for LeBron would be his Leo planets, and he has none, but his second house is Leo. And the reason I say that is because Magic Johnson is a Leo, and he would have to deal with Magic Johnson. So his second house is clear, it's open. Magic can occupy the second house. I think LA is a Virgo city. Let's check this out. Let's see. Thanks for the heads up on that in the scoop. Let's see what we got here. Okay, so LA is a Virgo city. And the rising sign for Los Angeles is Libra. So my Venus is right on the ascendant of LA. I should move there. I'd be popular there. So LA has Saturn in Sag, went through its Saturn return. Mars in Capricorn at 17 degrees. And LeBron has Mars. Let's see, where's his sun? Sun in Capricorn, 9 degrees. And Jupiter in Capricorn at 21. So Mars is sandwiched. LA's Mars is sandwiched right between his Jupiter and his Sun. So he'll have Mars there, LA's Mars in his 7th house. And it can be great as long as he's productive. If he's not productive, the energies will turn on him there. But certainly it's fantastic for like Sun, Mars, Jupiter. I think he'll do really well in Los Angeles. He'll do very, very well there. Let me see what else we have. LA has Moon in Aries. And that's at, so what, 3 degrees. And then where does LeBron have any Aries in his chart? So LeBron has Moon in Aries at 16 degrees. And then LA's Moon is in Aries. It's perfect. It's a perfect place for him. Absolutely perfect. So good call for LeBron James, even though he did not get, who knows, maybe Kawhi shows up, maybe Nosferatu, also known as Adam Silver, puts in a call and says, make this happen. Just like he made a call and killed the Chris Paul trade, which he should never, and that was David Stern. David Stern should never have killed that trade. That was a legitimate trade. If I was a Lakers fan and I'm not, I would have been pissed. All right, what else? What do we got going on in chat? Let's see what we got here. Hey, there's Eileen. What's going on? What else? All right, so here we go. You really seem chill. My dad said LeBron left. Is that true? I don't know if he left, but, you know, there was a weird kind of wave of people. Like, I don't know if you've seen some of these videos of Shaquille O'Neal or Draymond Green or even Jalen Rose where they're just like that, right? I don't know. There's this whole kind of underground theory that there are players in the NBA who are robots. And I wouldn't necessarily diss that. I think I think robotoids have been around for a long time. And I don't know if you've noticed this either, but when I was growing up, players in the NBA would have really severe knee injuries. And not just like minor ones, but major knee injuries. And those injuries don't happen anymore in the NBA. And I don't know why that is. Maybe it's the sports medicine. Maybe they've got some advanced technology that they're dealing with players and their joints and stuff. You don't normally see the same amount of knee injuries that you used to see in the NBA. I remember when Timmy Hardaway was playing with the Warriors, and he blew his knee out. He came back, but you just don't see that stuff. Local news today, heard of a 12-year-old shot in the drive-by. That happens every single day. Every single day. So Shaq is a robot. Go look up the video with Shaq and Victor Oladipo. Right? Hi, Judy. Just go look at that video. I don't think he's a robot. I think Shaquille O'Neal's in a trance. He's in a big-time trance in that video. Go watch it. Let's see. You saw that. It's bizarre. He was totally frozen. So change names. Would you use original? What city are you in, Black Market? He was totally frozen. Shaq, by the way, is a Mason. He's very proud of his Masonic. Emily, by the way, Emily Moore and I did a show on this. And she hasn't put it up yet on Off Planet, but it's coming. And it's all about sort of the MKULTRA aspects of sports, which we've talked about before. What city is it? Yeah, they were totally, they knew Shaq was in a trance. Total trance. And what was interesting was Victor Oladipo was singing My Way by Frank Sinatra. And I wonder if that was like a trigger for Shaq. I wonder if the song was the absolute trigger for that. You could do both. Yes, absolutely. There was talk. So Shaquille O'Neal he has a very unusual background. He was not raised by his father. And his father, in a lot like Tiger Woods, whose father was military intelligence. Tiger Woods' father had multiple degrees in psychology. And Tiger Woods was, in my estimation, a very intense MKUltra program for a lot of reasons. And I've written about this before, but I believe that Tiger Woods was a really key figure in getting Barack Obama elected, because Tiger Woods has the same kind of slightly genetic code as Obama to some extent. And they even sort of kind of look alike in some ways. And there's that issue of Golf Digest where they're together. So Tiger Woods was really promoted in a very big way. And that was to get people who were connected to the elites and to country clubs and white America to begin to accept somebody who was like Tiger Woods as president. And I think he was a very key participant in the election of Barack Obama. There's more to Tiger Woods than that, but that was part of his program and part of what he was here to do. You know, I mean, you think about it, right? You get all these conservative dudes, you know, they've come to embrace Tiger Woods, and not just embrace him, but Tiger Woods was a godlike figure in golf and very, very powerful. And so when Barack Obama came around, the transition from having brought somebody culturally, to some extent, representative of Obama into their consciousness made it much easier for this transition to occur and to begin to embrace a kind of a multi-ethnic president, which is what Obama was. He was multi-ethnic, just like Tiger Woods was. But I do believe Tiger Woods was replaced too. I think Eileen knocked the shit out of him, beat him to death on Thanksgiving in 2010. And I do believe Tiger Woods was replaced. What else we got here? Wonder if any neighbors are eavesdropping. Yeah, the hummingbirds are hanging out, man. Totally hanging out. Hey, there's Christine. I miss you, Christine. It's been a while. Send me an email. I'd like to connect. You just watch that video. That video there's another one, Jalen Rose, man. Jalen Rose looks like a total robot. Weird. It's completely weird. And there's one with Bill Clinton too. Have you seen the Bill Clinton one? The Bill Clinton one is really a trip. It's before he goes on the air, and he's like totally zombified, and then he's on. Let's see. Miss you too. Okay, so I'm just getting back into the swing of things, and we just covered the eclipse. There's Kathleen. Yeah, man, I'm glad I'm back too. We're gonna get the flames up again, but Mars is retrograde right now. You want to talk about the Mars retrograde? You guys want to get into that a little bit? So Friday, that Mars retrograde really hit me. I almost got into an accident. Number one, almost got into an accident. That was on Friday night. Skin of my teeth. And I've got Mars transit in my third house, which is, it's motion. It's local. And then driving back on Friday night, here's Karen. Hi, Karen. On Friday night, my timing chain went out in my truck. Mars retrograde. Hello, don't do anything. It's like Mercury retrograde, maybe only on steroids. So this is a really great time to reformat. Get into things that you've done, but you want to kind of do over. That's why I'm taking a break. That's why I'm taking a break from the flames. I want to build a couple of websites and get my new platforms together. This is a time to do that. You have to figure out where Aquarius is in your chart, right? So for me, it's third house and communication. Let's say you have Aquarius on your seventh house cusp. You should really be looking at the balance of power in your relationships with Mars transiting through there in retrograde. Have you given up your power? Did you take power away from your partner? Two-way street, right? What does that mean? Can you recalibrate it? How can it be more fair? Do you disconnect ideologically? Because one of the things that Mars Aquarius has is ideology. Aquarius is ideological. We're dealing with things like kids on the border, right? Or we're dealing with things like this gal that just got elected in New York. She's 28 years old. She got elected on essentially a communist platform. That's Mars Aquarius, right? People are aggressively asserting, we want to do something different. And that old school guy in New York City, his name Kelly, the incumbent, he lost. I don't agree with this woman's platform, because the only way that platform can actually exist if there's a redistribution of wealth. And we've witnessed when there's a redistribution of wealth, the 0.5% always keep their wealth. Remember that. They always keep their wealth. When there's a redistribution, who gets it? It's the middle class, lower middle class. So the only way you can actually provide for those social programs is if everything is taken away. And so I don't believe in that. That's just my 2 cents. I was reading a piece by Chris Hedges today, who I think is probably like the one liberal that there's a few liberals I like. I think he's really good. And he talks about some of the same things that I've been talking about, which is making your local environment much more livable and being involved in your local environment, because that's where change can actually occur. And, I believe we're going to go through a major financial piece in September, October. I don't want to talk about it tonight, but you need to be aware of it. And I think you need to, put things kind of in place, because September, October, I think we're going to hit a shitstorm, and we may get a big understanding of that right around, around the 15th of August, where we get into this, Grand Cross, it's a square, right? It's a little tilted, but there's a lot going on. And, what happens during that Grand Cross, which I've talked about, is kind of where you are and the elements that you have in your life. Be prepared to live with them after this moment in mid-August. So I think, again, I don't peddle fear, but I do promote being prepared. So I do believe we're going to go through some kind of financial turbulence. It's the writing's on the wall. I mean, it's happening. It's happening in a big way. So the Mars retrograde, let's just throw it around. We talked about relationship. Where do you share the same ideology as your partner? You could have planets around Mars too, like, maybe Venus in Aquarius. but Mars is not in your 7th house, but it's around Venus, it would be the same thing. Or you have the moon in Aquarius, and Mars will be, doing its thing. It won't be, maybe it's not completely conjunct your Mars or your moon, because it's really about 9 degrees. They're going back to 28 Capricorn, which is also quite important in a lot of ways. Because when it goes back into Capricorn, we're dealing with, like, Aquarius tends to be like this gal from New York State, who, by the way, grew up in Westchester County, which has a lot of money, and her father was an architect, and she went to the best schools, right? It's kind of typical in some ways. And now she wants to make everybody have free everything. But there's a flip side to that, right? And that's Capricorn. Because Aquarius is like everybody gets a free lunch, and everybody gets a medal, and everybody gets a universal income, which is, I don't know. I think that, to me, that is a yoke and a chain around our necks. And we've been conditioned to begin to accept those things in a lot of ways. But Capricorn is not like that. Capricorn believes to some extent in a marketplace or market system, whereas Aquarius doesn't. In Aquarius, there are no marketplaces. There are networks, and there are communities, which is fine. I don't have a problem with that. But Mars is going to retrograde back to 20 Capricorn, which to me, okay, I just got hit on this. I hadn't been thinking about it, but I just got a hit on it. I feel like something's going to go down. And I feel like we're a bad redhead incident away from martial law. I'll be really honest with you. So when Mars goes retrograde from Aquarius, which is group-oriented activity, and ideological, and Mars being aggressive and regressive, and it goes back to Capricorn, what are we dealing with? We're dealing with hierarchies, and we're dealing with the system. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but when I look at that, the potential for it is pretty profound. I don't think we're that far away from having martial law, to be quite honest with you. And if it did happen, it would happen during this retrograde cycle, as it goes back into Capricorn. And that would be sort of the Capricornian kind of oligarchs, putting their thumb down, saying we've had enough. And that's what they want. People don't understand this. You get these people on the right, and they're calling for the blood of the left. You get the people on the left, Maxine Waters, and they're calling for the blood on the right. And the people that are sitting back and basically controlling time, they want it to happen. They want blood in the streets, because then they can block. And these detention centers that they're setting up for these immigrants, do you think they're just solely for the immigrants? No, not at all. And how many people has QAnon fingered, right? Like QAnon if you were like a closet patriot or whatever, Q has gotten you out of your. So there now of patriots that are available. All right, this is the dark, cynical side of me. It's true. So what the powers that be want people to get in the streets, and they want to divide and conquer. And it's a way for them to assert more power and control. The people on the left clearly don't understand that. All they want is blood. The people on the right, and it either be pissed off at the liberals, so pissed off at every single bad president since really JFK. They want blood. I actually think this. I've been thinking about this. The way to get through this is for people on the left and the right to do and actually trip together. I think that's about the only way we get through this. And what do we got? I've outed myself and have a hard headache ever since. People's Revolution. I agree with the People's Revolution. Separate and cause absolutely. They want to take. Yeah, they want to split us up, man. So sick of the slavery. Well, yes, it's hard, but we got to build a different, a better beast.